One of the biggest trends in fishing over the last half decade has been a push for smaller boats, and we're going to talk about my love of small boats and how to set one up on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey guys, Chad LaChance here. Thanks as always for tuning into this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast, brought to us as always by the folks at Sportsman's Warehouse. Visit them at sportsmans.com or any one of 140 plus stores nationwide, and also Peterson Toyota in Fort Collins, Colorado. They have a brand new 2025 new model 4Runner out front, and it is gorgeous. They're here to service all of your car and truck needs, guys. It's a beautiful March day, and I'm feeling pretty good right now. And the reason I'm feeling pretty good is this podcast marks the 3-year anniversary of launching this podcast. It's the 157th episode. I had no idea that it would end up being popular and that we would make it this long, but here we are, still at it. And I appreciate all of you that have subscribed wherever you have. Tune in week in and week out on YouTube or iHeartRadio or Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts. I appreciate that very much, and I would hope you would share it potentially with some of your fishy friends, because we're all about a labor of love and sharing the outdoors. So over about the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a huge push for small boats in the industry, and I think that's largely due to gigantic increases in fishing boat prices. For many years, pushing 2 decades, I have had a pro staff deal with a boat company, and I've rotated through boats every year, every other year for a long time. And I'm intimately familiar with how expensive they have gotten, particularly since 2020. Boat that I could buy in 2020 for $80,000 is now $110,000 for basically exactly the same boat, and that far exceeds inflation or anything else. Boats have just gotten very expensive, and I think because of that, you see even a lot of big name bass pros switching to aluminum boats. They're getting away from the full-blown fiberglass tournament rigs that were so huge through the early 2000s. To the point where they swelled up and got 250 horsepower and some of them even 22 feet long, great big bass boats. And now you're starting to see a lot of relatively big name pros in 19 to 21 foot aluminum boats with 150s or 200s on the back. And that's, I believe, largely due to the costs involved with running a tournament season as a pro. Not just competing in the boat, but hauling it around the country, because it's considerably heavier of a big fiberglass boat. It's more expensive to insure, it's more expensive to fuel, it's more expensive in a lot of different ways. And so you'll see guys that are finding out that they can catch 99.5% of the fish out of a 19-foot aluminum boat that they could catch out of a 21-foot, fiberglass boat that costs twice as much money. And when that starts happening at the highest level of pro tournament fishing and bass fishing particularly, then you see it trickle down into other anglers as well. And in my local bass club that I work with here, in Colorado, incidentally, I'll be emceeing the Fulman Open tournament here I believe it's in August. I should know that off the top of my head, but Centennial Bass Club puts that on every year. Several of its longstanding members turned in their fiberglass boats and headed back for aluminum boats. So it's a big trend. And then furthermore, ICAST, at the International Conference of Allied Sport Fishing Trades, for the last several years, there's been a gigantic push for not just small boats themselves, but the accessories that go with them that bring you all the bells and whistles of a big boat. And that's really where I'm starting to see big differences in how things will work out in terms of fishability of these small boats. So whether it be a kayak, a small John boat of some sort, some of the roto-molded or plastic boat-looking things that aren't really kayaks, but they aren't really full-blown boats, those are a huge trend in those as well. And just really simple custom boats, of which I have one and I love. And am looking at upgrading yet again. I've had that boat now since about, I want to say 25, 26 years. It's on its second incarnation. When I got it, it was stock. Then I did some work to it and did a bunch of custom work. Then I got away from it for a while as I focused on the big boats, and it sat outside and weather got to it and it didn't do great. And then I redid it again a little over a decade ago now. And now it's in excellent shape and still holding up good, but it's time to upgrade some of the components. So I thought I'd do a whole podcast on small boats, why I love them, why I think you should consider them either as a second boat or as your only boat. And in my case, it's a second boat. And I thoroughly enjoy fishing out of it, no more or less than I do my big Ranger boats. And in my past, just to give me some background or some cred, my very first boat that I ever owned was a 12.5-foot fiberglass John boat. It was ridiculously heavy and overbuilt. I put an electric trolling motor on the back of it. And I started hauling that thing around right out of college. I was hauling that boat all over the place out of college. And I had it for not a particularly long period of time. It fit in the back of my truck, and I had a great time with it. But pretty quick, I figured out that a real boat, in other words, some kind of a bigger gas boat would be a great thing. I bought a 17-foot aluminum, actually an old Tracker TX17 that had a ton of hours on it and a smoky old Mercury on the back. But that boat got me into the more what guys would say a real bass boat, let's just say. From there, I upgraded to a 21-foot fiberglass boat and never really looked back, and I still have that boat. However, all the way through that time period, I have had also a small hand-launched boat of some sort. So for 25 plus years, I've had a small boat on tap that I could take and put in wherever I need to go. And in the case of my boat right now, it's a Coleman Crawdad, which is approximately 11 and a half feet long, a little under 4 feet wide, like 43 inches, 44 inches wide. And it's blow molded. And so it's a plastic boat or an ABS boat. And I've also built a full custom 16-foot aluminum boat that I just bought an empty aluminum hull and put decks and all wiring and everything in. I did that at one point, and then I sold that one. It was on a trailer, and now my current Crawdad, full wiring, electric motor on the back, electric motor on the front, small Lowrance unit on it, carpeted small decks, no seats because the boat's not really designed to sit in. You need to stand to fish, and you can sit to move around. And I love that little boat. In fact, I'm fixing to upgrade it again, as I just said. I'm going to start doing some work on it, and basically I'm just going to upgrade the electronics because they're more than a decade or right at a decade old now, and it's time to upgrade them. And I'm going to add some sort of a shallow water anchor system to it as well. And I added one of those a couple of years back that I custom rigged, and it worked pretty good. But now there's companies that make anchors for small boats and that are not dissimilar to the shallow water anchors you see on the back of a full-blown bass boat these days. So I'm going to do some upgrading on it. But first, let's talk a little bit about why I think the small boats are so important and so much fun. First of all, big boat's great, and I love it. And I love driving that big Ranger boat around. It handles like a sports car. It's just a really fun boat. And it's a huge but. Every time you operate it, you got to consider the expense, for one. And for two, you don't want to scratch it. I have to sell my boat every year, every other year. And when I say scratch it, I'm being a little facetious. You don't want to do any damage to it. I don't really like to beach it if I can avoid it. I don't like banging around in the standing timber with it. I don't do things like that a lot of times you'll see pro tournament guys will do regardless, because it's a different mindset being in the media than it is being in a pro tournament situation. So I can pick and choose my battles a little bit more than they can at the pro level. And that's also why buying a boat from a pro tournament guy isn't always a good choice, because they're thinking about their boat along one lines, and that is straight up as a tool. And if you need to run 5 miles in 18-inch deep water, then they're going to do it. If you got to bang around in the timber with it, they're going to do it. If you got to running in flooded grass mats are going to clog the water pump and stress the motor out. Who knows? There's just a lot of things that Derby pros do with boats that are required to compete at their level. But a media guy doesn't have to do that. And the media guy like me, hosting TV shows, can pick and choose my days, pick and choose my fishing locations, and unfortunately I make some of those decisions based on the safety of my boat. But when I get my little boat, or any of my little boats in the past, all bets are off. I will bang that thing into wherever. I'll take it anywhere I can get it. I'll park it on whatever bank I need to park it on. It is recklessly expendable, 100% usable boat. And if it sustains damage in the process, then it sustains damage in the process, in the same way that a Derby pro looks at his big boat. But I'm not fishing for $100,000 a weekend, so I need to consider that all the time. So there's less stress in fishing in the little boat. If something does break on it, let's say that I break the trolling motor on the big boat, well, that's a couple $1,000, $2,500. If I break the trolling motor on the small boat, it's a couple $100, maybe $300. Things like that get in your brain, and therefore it's less stressful to fish out of. And again, it doesn't require near the costs involved to run it as well. So for one, those are the reasons that I like about it. It's just the sheer practicality of it. For two, it forces you to focus a little bit. A small boat of any kind, could be a kayak, could be my hand launch crawdad or whatever. I'm just lumping all of them under small boats. And the general break for me on a small boat is something that two people can carry. If you can't carry it with two people, it's, in my mind, not a small boat. You're now dealing with a trailered vessel and all bets are off. So basically you're capped out at about a 14-footer, and even that is a bit much for two people to carry. So I'm looking at kayaks, 12-foot John boats, maybe 12-foot modified V's or something like that, or any of the plastic boats out there is really what I'm referencing in all this. But anyway, the small boat forces you to focus a little bit, because in the big boat, I might have literally 40 rods in the boat. I might have 25 Plano boxes in the boat full of tackle. I have all my available tools to me, which also means I have a bigger puzzle to put together. I have way more pieces of things to choose, right? So if I'm trying to decide what to fish, it's easier to decide that when I only have 4 choices because I'm in a little boat. If I've got 40 choices, it's a lot harder, and you can get yourself spun out trying to figure out what to do. So you can focus on your core stuff. And what goes in my little boats, anytime I'm going to my little boat, unless it's a specific lure testing or rod testing or something like that I'm doing, if I'm going fishing in my little boat with just for the sake of going fishing, then I take my confidence stuff. And you will quickly learn what your confidence stuff is if you don't already know, because by about your 3rd or 4th trip, you'll figure out what you take each time, and that'll make a big difference. So that's one of the things that I think it helps. It helps you focus. And I can tell lots of stories of people that I've known who are either in a small boat or maybe even like a float tube or personal pontoon, and they get a big boat for the first time, a boat that they can actually run around all over the lake and all that for the first time. You know what they end up doing? Catching a lot less fish. There's usually a big learning curve that happens, because now not only do they have more tackle to decide from, because the first thing everybody does is put all their tackle in that big boat, then the next thing they have available is the whole lake to fish. And when you're in a little boat, in a lot of cases, you don't have that. And it forces you to make the most of the water you have access to, as opposed to cherry picking the sweet spots off all of the water on the lake. And I'll be the first guy to tell you that I will run a pattern. I could be on a 6,000 acre lake in Kansas, and I have no problem fishing from one end to the other in a day if that's what it takes to run my pattern, or a 20,000 acre lake for that matter. It's just a matter of how much gas do you want to burn. Well, in the little boat, it's literally a time thing. And so I can't even get there. Or it's a safety thing where I need to stay a certain area or wind might be an issue. And so that's a key thing there. But it really forces you to narrow your tackle and narrow your fishing spots down and learn to make the most out of the water that's right in front of you. And ironically, If you're a guy like me that has a big boat and a little boat, leave the big boat at home and force yourself to go in the little boat for a while, and you will learn to maximize whatever water you have available to you in the big boat too. So the first to tell you that you can learn stuff in the little boat that applies to the big boat and vice versa all the time. So it is not a learning disadvantage necessarily in the little boat, because you can learn stuff quicker because you have less choices to work with. So I feel like it's easier to gain confidence in a little boat as well. And therefore, it will help you in the long run, regardless of if it's a stepping stone or if it's your final destination as far as a little boat goes. Now, from there, the things about the little boat that I think are really important to keep in mind, first of all, is boat control. Boat control is a huge issue in the big boat. So much so that when I fish with people that aren't good at boat control, it drives me insane, right? And if I'm fish with guys that are really good at boat control, even when the fishing's rough, you're going to have a good day on the water. Well, you can learn boat control in a little boat. Obviously, there's differences between how my 21-foot Ranger and how my 12-foot Crawdad handle certain situations, but the concepts of them are the same. So when do I need to be doing a stop and go in the boat, moving, stopping, versus a continuous slow move? When can I learn how to make this boat crab, at a 45-degree angle down the bank? When do I stick some sort of a shallow anchor down versus staying on the electric motor? All of those things will make a difference in your catching over the course of the day. And the little boat will teach you to think about them such that you will apply them in whatever boat you're in the long run. So the first thing I'm going to say about getting a little boat is get your control of that boat, under control, for lack of a better way to put it. So my Crawdad, I mentioned early on that it's got an electric motor at the front and electric motor at the back. The reason is this: the boat, if there's only a motor at one end, you don't have all of the same control features that you have in the big boat. So if it's a stepping stone, having both will teach you when it's time to get on the big motor and go somewhere, or stay on the little motor up front. And in the case of my my little boat, it's a 56-pound thrust on the back and a 30-pound thrust on the front. And so the big motor, even on low, is too fast to fish. The boat's already moving along at like way too fast to fish if you're on the big motor in the back, the big electric motor. But if you're on the electric motor in the front, now it's infinitely variable. Instead of having a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 speed rating, it's infinitely variable, and I can set the speed of that boat wherever I want it to. Really important to be able to do that. And so also having the motors at both ends gives you a keel at the other end. A lot of boat designs, if there's only a motor at one end, don't handle well. You need a little bit of drag at both ends of the boat, and that will keep the boat going in a straight line. And so I use the motor on the back of the boat when I'm fishing off the front. And again, it's only 12 feet long, so we're talking about a step and a half between the two. But I use the motor on the back to keep the boat going in a straight line. Otherwise, when you shut the motor off in the front of the boat, it would pivot around that trolling motor, and suddenly you're going backwards. So you need a keel of some sort back there, and the electric motor is excellent for that. Also, it lets me turn that motor at a 45-degree angle and force my boat to crab down a bank somewhere at a 45-degree angle or 30-degree angle to keep my casting angles exactly what I need. So that can be really important as well. So if you're going to get a little boat, make sure it's set up for your best control scenarios. Now, I'm seeing kayaks on my home lake right now with literally shallow water anchors, electric motors, all of the same stuff you see in the big boat. And I see that on small plastic boats like my Crawdad. I see it on all kinds of little boats these days. So it's not uncommon, but I only see it at the highest level of those boats. And really having an extra motor also gives you the ability to do some kind of strange things you might not think about, like back troll in a little boat or whatever the case might be. So I think it's a big thing to have motors at both ends if possible, unless you're in a kayak situation which already has a keel on it, which maybe you can get away with just one motor. Also, it's much easier to control a boat from the electric motor on the front, but it's not as good for driving across the open lake necessarily. So that's when I put the big motor. That's why the big motor's on the back. So for the record, on my Crawdad, they both run off one battery. I only run one motor at a time, and the wiring from that battery goes to both trolling motors, and I can just run either one of them at any given time. So they both are pulling off the same battery. I'm just running one motor at a time. Then the other thing I recommend on your little boat, particularly if you're trying to use it as a learning tool, is electronics of some sort. Now, I'm not going to tell you need to go out and put high-end marine electronics on your boat. I'm also not going to tell you not to, because in most cases you can apply almost all of it to the big boat. The one thing I maybe think I'm not even going to say that. I'm going to back that out of here. I make these up as I go, and I don't think I'm going to even say that. I think there's no reason to not put whatever electronics levels you would put in your big boat on your little boat if it's in your budget and it's in your skill set. There is no point in putting a 12-inch, $3,000 graph on a $400 boat unless you're trying to learn that graph. But if you are, maybe that gives you the opportunity to go out and learn how to use that graph better. In the case of my boat, it's got very simple electronics on it. The one thing I recommend is that you have mapping, because a simple fish finder, sonar, whatever you want to call it, will show you a lot of things, but the map allows you to repeat them. And even the most basic map will allow you to see where you've been, mark waypoints, get back to those waypoints. It can be very simple. I'm not talking about, full-on detailed 3D maps like I have in the big boat. I'm just talking about the basic mapping feature that comes with a GPS-enabled sonar unit. So that's a key thing, is to put electronics on the boat for the sake of learning how to use them, and for the information they will provide you a lot. Now, in the little boat, typically the reason I set it up with such a basic sonar unit, and at that time I was a Lowrance Pro Staff person, I could have put anything on it I wanted to put on that boat. I still put a very simple sonar unit on it because of the things I mentioned in the beginning of the boat being a little bit of a beater, so to speak. So if I need to, crash it through timber or whatever, I'm gonna do that. And I didn't want a big heavy sonar unit on there either. Also, bigger sonar units draw more power, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of reasons why bigger anything is not always better than smaller anything. But in the case of the boat, my stuff was really simple because I decided, or I thought at the time, that I was only gonna use it in little ponds and stuff, and having a basic understanding of depth and a basic map would be fine. Well, I mentioned early in this podcast, I'm gonna upgrade that boat. The electronics have gotten so much better now that I'm going to put basically a mini version of what's in my big boat in the small boat, and that will open up all of the same tools to me that I have. So that's why I'm upgrading it. Not that I feel like it's on a 100% need basis. It's more on the fact that I like to have the stuff. I'm so used to having, all the different sonar stuff that we have. And this is not a podcast on electronics, but for a fairly basic amount of money these days, you can get a pretty solid sonar setup for a small boat or a kayak. You don't have to spend a fortune on them. And if you want, you can, for about $1,000, you can have, active target or forward-facing sonar and other stuff in the boat as well. So you can do it as much as you want. But equipping the boat with the same stuff as a full-blown fishing boat will help you out. Another thing I mentioned early on is I want to put the shallow water anchor on the boat, because after having them for years and years now, my big boats, you got to have it. It's just such a game changer for fishing in anything less than about 8 foot deep of water. It just really helps you out a lot. And I hate the term game changer. I really despise that term. But the reality was, it did change the game. When I put power poles on the back of my bass boat and planted them the first time as the wind was drifting me into a cattail edge, it was like an epiphany. It changed how I could fish. And that's why I'm adding it to my little boat. I mentioned I did a temporary one. I kind of rigged a system where I could use a long piece of bamboo and stake the boat to the bottom, like I learned from some catfish guys in the deep south, and that worked okay. But there's better systems now, and I'm going to upgrade the boat to put those in there. The one thing I'll tell you about a little boat, at least here in my home state of Colorado, is if you can avoid putting it on a trailer, if you've got a car of some sort and you can put it on a trailer, you have to put on a trailer, I should say, because you have a car of some sort, it's not nearly the advantage. If you have a truck, a pickup of some kind, and you can put that boat in the pickup, that exempts you from a lot of A&S inspections around the state. And that opens up waters to fishing that you can't otherwise fish unless there's an A&S inspector, aquatic nuisance species inspector on site. And so there's quite a few places I put my little boat where I couldn't launch the big boat because of timing or because of the practicality of the not being an appropriate boat ramp or things like that. There's also been lakes that I've gone to where I needed to four-wheel drive my truck back in there, and I'm not going to hook my Ranger to the Tundra and then try to go down a four-wheel drive trail with it, but I will put the crawdad in the back of the Tundra and drive it down that four-wheel drive road and unload it when we get there. And so that's another scenario that I really, really like the small boat. It opens up places that I just can't run the big boat. And but yet, because the boat is well thought out and well chosen, it allows me to stand and fish and have all my tools available to me in terms of electric motors, sonar units, and shallow anchors that I have. And those things all are the same tools I have in the big boat, and therefore it's just all downsized, simplified, and made a bunch less expensive. So I think there's going to continue to see this trend of small boats. And the one thing I'll say that's, in my opinion, the most important thing is, particularly for a bass guy or somebody that's a hardcore caster, you have to be able to stand in the boat. If any kayak that I can't stand in or any small boat that I can't stand in, I furthermore can't stand to fish in. I don't enjoy to sit and fish, and it does limit how you can do certain things without question, and that's why I try to avoid that. So whatever boat you're going to choose, whether you're going to do something crazy like buy an old, 30-year-old crawdad like mine and customize it, or go buy a new rotomolded boat at Sportsman's Warehouse somewhere, or go buy a kayak, I would strongly consider something I can stand in. Furthermore, I would keep the weight as low as you can keep it. The one thing about little boats that all of a sudden becomes a burden is when they get too heavy to deal with. And I said in the beginning, you need to be able to carry it with two people, or in my opinion, a bunch of the practicality of it's gone out the window. I can, all by myself, get my crawdad in and out of my truck. I have to take the battery out of it, and I have to take the trolling motors off it, but that's a 3-minute process tops, and then I can put it in the truck, and then I can put all of those things in the boat, and then I can drive it wherever I want to go. So whatever it is you're considering adding to your boat, consider the weight every single time. And I did videos on my Coleman crawdad. Incidentally, there's a whole bunch of videos on that crawdad on the Fishful Thinker YouTube channel if you want to check those out. But when I first did that boat, a lot of people were like, geez, why didn't you put seats in it? Why didn't you put seats in it? And pedestal seats or a foot-controlled trolling motor, both same answer. Both make the boat too heavy and too complicated. And particularly the foot-controlled trolling motor made the boat nose heavy in a big way. And seats, of even basic seats, made the boat top heavy. So by not using either of those things, the boat has a low center of gravity and is balanced front to rear. And all I did was put a throttle switch. I rigged a throttle switch in the deck of the boat, so I can't steer the trolling motor with my foot, but I can with my knees, and I can turn it on and off with my toe or my foot. So that's what's in my boat. If you want to see details on that, you can shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to get them to you, or check them out on the YouTube channel, like I just said, or on the Fishful Thinker Facebook page. If you look up an album called Hot Rod Crawdad, you will see a full build on the boat last time I built it, and I'm going to go through, clean it up, upgrade some stuff, and you'll see more content from that boat going forward. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully you're considering a small boat yourself, even if you have a big one. If you're a bank angler and you're listening to this podcast, strongly consider a small boat. They can be had, particularly these days. Get on Marketplace or get on Craigslist or whatever, start looking around for a small used boat, and even if you got to do some work on it, it's worth doing. It gives you a big giant floating tackle box, and it just adds a whole level of fun to be floating rather than walking down the bank. So again, I appreciate you listening. If you want to join the conversation, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, or Twitter, or X, I should say, that's at Fishful Thinker. I would appreciate that very much. Check out the YouTube channel at Fishful Thinker as well, and tune into World Fishing Network and Altitude Sports to see what we're up to. So thanks for tuning in. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.